Hi everybody. Just adjusting the camera and getting ready here to start our conversation about voice in memoir. And if you can't hear me, make sure that you turn up your audio. Also, if you have any questions or comments or things to contribute as we go, make sure that you just type in the comments below. Christy Lynn, hi. So fun to see names pop up. So if I can't see you, it's nice to know that you're there by just a little comment or a like or something like that. Great. So we're going to talk this morning a little bit about voice in memoir or in narrative nonfiction, and much of what we talk about is also going to be relevant for fiction, although there's more complexities with fiction in that you're typically writing first person in memoir and not always doing that in fiction. So my notes are over here, so I'm going to look down every once in a while just to make sure that I'm covering things. And if you have things that you want me to cover, just pop up a note, and I can see that at the bottom of my screen. And I can either type in a response to you, or I can just say it. This is so fun. I love Facebook Live. All right. So let's just talk about what does even the term voice mean when we're talking about narrative writing, nonfiction or fiction. And so I just wanted to start out with talking a little bit about what happens for me when I'm working as a therapist in my therapy office. When somebody first comes in, and like the first time they come in or the first few times they come in, one thing I do is I ask a lot of questions about their history, about what brought them into the therapy room right now. And then I listen carefully for the tone of their concern. And by that, what I mean is that sometimes people will come in and there's like a real sadness to their concern, or sometimes there's an anger. You know, it can be a disappointment or a sense of victimization. And while any number of emotions might pass through during the conversation, there's usually an underlying energy about what somebody is bringing into the therapy room. And sometimes that thing that they're bringing in, or the energy they're bringing in, can even be something like denial, or you can see the picture but no live stream. Renee, can you see a live stream? Can you see me? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see me? You might need to go over to the memoir page. So let me actually just type that in here, and then we'll continue. Or can I type that in? I'm not sure I can. No. Okay. So okay, I see a like, so that means you can see me. All right. So if you can't see me, then you need to go over to the live stream on the Y Memoir page. And if you go over to the Y Memoir page, you should be able to see the live video. So, okay, so just regrouping, getting back to what I was saying, the energy that somebody might bring into the therapy room might also be something like denial, or it could be humor. And that humor is on the surface of what's underneath, but that's the general tone that they bring in. And so when I think about memoir, which is not therapy, but when I'm working with my memoir students, one thing that I'm always looking for as I'm reading their material is this underlying tone. What is it that is going on in terms of the energy of the material? Okay, so I'm really primarily looking for a level of honesty. And with developing your voice on the page, you're wanting to dig into, and we'll talk a little bit about how to get there in a few minutes, but you're wanting to dig into what feels like a really authentic and honest way to connect with the scenic material. So is the connection a sensate experience? Like, does it cover the senses? Are you connected to the space that you're in when that you're writing about? Are you connected to the other people in the scene with you? And however you do that connection, you can do it through humor, you can do it through sadness. Certainly there are memoirs where there's an undertone of victimization through the whole thing. And that energy can shift, right? As you're developing an arc, you may start out with a real sense of sadness, but it might move toward victory or resolution or understanding or something like that. So one thing to think about is just at what level and with what energy do you honestly connect with the material that you're writing. Okay? And here I have a note to talk about the what and the so what. So a lot of times as we're beginning to develop the skill of memoir writing, or really any kind of narrative writing, we're working with the scenic material, right? So we're working with the smell, the sound, the touch of so we're working with the five senses. And all of that is an important layer as you're drafting. And when you go into revisions, then go deeper, go even one layer below the what of the scene to the so what of the scene. So why is this important? And however you get there, you can get there through humor, you can get there through disappointment, but just, go to that next layer. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you can see me? I'm still seeing the red wheelbarrow is being cut off. So just give me a thumbs up if you can see me. And I'm not seeing a thumbs up, so I'm going to continue as if you can see me. And if okay, I see a thumbs up. That's great. It floats across my screen. I love that. All right. So one question that I get a lot is, can you have more than one voice in the material? And the answer is, certainly you can have a lot of different energies in the material that you're working with. Okay, Christy Lynn says it's kicked her out a couple of times, but hopefully the video is recording continuously. I'm not sure what that's about. Technology, that's what it's about. So you absolutely can have more than one voice, and most of the time, oh, Renee's saying it froze. So, okay. But some of you are seeing me. Sorry about this, everybody. With Facebook Live, it seems like sometimes it plays pretty continuously, and other times it's a little bit spotty. And for whatever reason today, it's a little spotty. And it's working on the iPhone app. Okay, it's back. You know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to turn off the Wi-Fi on my other device because I have a hunch that maybe I've got too many things connected to the internet. So let's try that and see if that's any better. All right. So the question of whether or not you can have more than one voice in a memoir, and the answer is that most always you probably will have more than one voice or tone in the material. And so when I'm working with my students in Memory into Memoir in my 9-month program, we talk a lot about the voice of innocence and the voice of wisdom. So let's say, and I'm going to give you some examples here in a few minutes. I've pulled some examples out of some books that I've been reading lately to give you a little view of how you might handle different material. But so with the voice of innocence, that is when the narrator is like really in the material. So the voice of innocence is showing and reporting what's going on in the moment. It's not always in present tense, but it will be very present. So through the eyes of the narrator, you walk into the room, and there's the mother across the room, and the narrator smells her perfume, And whatever tone she does this with, okay, if she does, she can do it angrily or she can do it joyfully, but you're seeing it through the eyes of the narrator in the moment. Even if you're writing in past tense, it's a very moment by moment slice of life kind of experience, that voice of innocence. So showing what is going on. So the voice of innocence would be the voice of the what very often, okay? Now, I'm not saying these are just super distinct, but the voice of wisdom will be discussing the so what. So the voice of wisdom is going to be reflecting on the moment. The voice of wisdom may flash back to another moment. The voice of wisdom may make the current moment into a metaphor for something larger, for a larger question that's being discussed in the material. So Renee, if you're still there, I'm just thinking about how very often in Renee's material, and she's writing about her childhood in homelessness and foster care, she's going back and forth between that little child's view of the world and a slightly older or wiser voice, which still stays very childlike in its energy, but it has some commentary, it has some reflection, that wiser voice of what's going on for the little child, or sometimes empathy for the parental figures. That's the voice of wisdom. So that voice may be making meaning as you go. And it's not like I said, it's not like you distinctly, oh, hi Diane, I'm glad it's back. It's not like you distinctly move from one paragraph to another. And in one paragraph, you're in the voice of innocence, and the next you're in the voice of wisdom. They can be commingled, even through the observations, they can be commingled. But there is that perspective of just that in the moment, and then slightly pulled back wisdom, if that makes sense. So how does a writer actually produce the voice that she's shooting for? So this is, and if you guys have questions or comments, or a great book that you've read about voice, or a book that you've read recently that has a great voice in it, be sure to go ahead and type in the comments. So the writer is producing the voice with her craft. So it's going to be things like her word choice, right? To use a word like I sauntered versus I skipped versus I gallywagged. Is that a word? Versus I hustled. There's going to be, depending on the word choice that you use for verbs, how you describe objects, the colors you choose. I mean, all of these different possibilities around word choice is going to infuse the material with a general tone or energy, and an age, probably, a level of maturity, a level of insight, a level of attitude. So all of those things will come together through word choice. Sentence structure will be another way that your voice will come across on the page. Short, clipped, harsh sentence structures without much, something that would take 2 seconds to diagram back in, your sentence diagramming days, if you ever did that. Those short, clipped sentences are going to bring about a different kind of voice energy than, say, long, meandering sentences with lots of clauses and modifiers. So how you structure your sentences will also largely bring across an attitude, an age, an energy, an emotion. Pacing is another thing, right? So somebody who favors a really poetic sort of voice might take their time with certain sensates, or Mary Carr calls the senses a carnal experience, the experience of the body. whereas a more intellectual tone might be more heady and energized by meaning making, right? And so how long you spend on various scenes and how you pace the emotional energy out through the course of your material, whether it's short or a book length material, that's all going to also contribute to the voice of the narrator. Choice of details, I mentioned this, but like a narrator who notices the animals in the room before noticing the people, that's going to lend to a certain kind of energy. It's going to tell us something about how the narrator connects to the world. If the narrator is primarily noticing the colors on the walls and the art, here I actually think about one of my students, Kathy, who's writing about a hike on the John Muir Trail. So with Kathy's material, one of the things is that she is, her voice is very much in her mind. She lives this hike as a processing experience of her past and of her mindset and of her struggles with perfection and imperfection. And as she goes on the hike, there's not a lot, in fact, we're working on this in revisions, there's not a lot of external detail. So even when through revisions we're infusing her material with external detail so that she's bringing the reader in through her eyes, her voice is still primarily going to be an inner reflective voice versus a fast-paced external, like I'm thinking of the voice. Thanks for the hearts and loves, friends. I'm thinking of the voice of the narrator in Racing in the Rain. Did anybody read Racing in the Rain? It's a novel, but it's written as if it were a memoir through the dog's perspective. And the dog belongs to, as if dogs belong to anyone, the dog's person is a race car driver. And so most of that material is the tone or the voice of that material is really written out of like this dog's love for this person and observation of what's going on in the person's life. But since it is written as a memoir, it all has to happen through the dog's eyes. Like nothing happens where the dog isn't present. So if the dog gets left in the car, for example, all he can do is have flashbacks and reflect on what might be happening in the house where his person is breaking up with his girlfriend or whatever. So the voice in that material is brought forward with what details, the details that are noticed, and those would be the details that a dog would notice, which would be different than what a person would. Eve, you read it. Yeah. I read that book while I was running on a 30K in Arizona in the backwoods, getting lost. And I don't think that being so involved in the dog's perspective was helpful for me while I was trying to keep track of the markers hung on the trees so I could find the trail. But anyway, I have a really distinct memory of that voice. Dialogue is another way that a writer will produce the voice she's shooting for. So when a narrator puts her own voice into the material, Christy Lynn, I think the trouble for our own personal internal connections. Oh, phone data seems to run smoother. So this just in on the technology, Christy Lynn is saying that if you're having trouble watching this video, try your phone. So when you put your voice into a dialogue, there's a lot of information there for the reader. You know, if the voice of the narrator says "screw you," we're going to get a totally different energy and voice out of that than if the narrator says in dialogue, "Pardon me, but I don't agree with you." So there's a lot that you can show the reader about the narrator's understanding of life and way of being in the world through the dialogue that you give her. And for that matter, through the dialogue that you give the other characters in your memoir, because what the narrator notices or what she hears isn't always going to be necessarily what the other person actually said. So most of us, when we're writing memoir, we don't actually remember word for word how conversations went. So we're inventing those out of our imagination. We're asking ourselves, what would that person have said to me? And that, what ends up on the page, is always going to be through the lens of the narrator's general energy, right? So if the narrator's general energy is an energy of victimization or grief or optimism or any of these things, that is the lens through which you're going to remember other people's dialogue, and that's what's going to end up on the page. So all of this stuff really combines to create the voice of the narrator. And I just want to pause here and say something that I'm hitting home on with my memory into memoir students constantly is that this stuff doesn't come out in the first draft. Your first draft is going to be like, I walked into the room, my mother was there, she wasn't smiling. Your first draft is going to be the basic facts. It's when you go back in that you sit with your material, you reread it, you close your eyes, and you feel into what the emotional energy was in that scene and what details bring up that emotional energy. So, as you're writing your first draft, you go back through and you read it and you're like, this bores even me. Don't fret, don't fear. Bringing the authentic voice that will connect with the reader will absolutely come in the revisions. Eve is saying, as a beginner, struggle with shifts in perspective on the experience. So Eve, are you writing memoir or are you writing fiction? Just pop that up for me. I see a heart going across. Oh, I saw myself freeze. I can see that the video connection might be kind of funky. Memoir. Okay. So with memoir, and I'll try to answer this, and then if I don't get at it, what you're getting at, then you can clarify the question. Okay. So in memoir, the perspective is always going to be through your eyes as the narrator, right? So you're not going to jump into other people's heads because you're writing most likely in first person. There certainly are a handful of memoirs that are written that kind of get around that, Actually, I just read Love and Trouble by Claire Dederer, and she does put herself into third person, and she writes in second person. So she writes, whole scenes like you get up in the morning and you go brush your teeth, and then you look in the mirror and you say, oh my God, I'm 44, So she did use some other conventions besides first person, but most of us writing memoir are going to be writing in first person. So when you're writing in first person, you aren't shifting into the head of someone else. If you do want to conjecture what somebody else is thinking or doing or saying, you can totally do that. But you need to do that from the perspective of, I watched her face and I knew this expression meant she was pissed off, right? Now, if you mean shifting in perspective between the voice of innocence and the voice of wisdom, that you can kind of do like sentence to sentence. You can jump in so you can say, I walked into the room, I saw her face, and I knew that her expression meant she was angry. You could jump into the voice of wisdom with something like, I'd been watching that face my whole life. I remember the first time I noticed that the thin lips meant anger. I was 5. And you can do a little bit of a flashback. It doesn't have to be a long one. I was 5. She walked into the bathroom and saw that I'd gotten the bath water all over the floor. She didn't say a word, but her lips went straight. She walked out and didn't talk to me for 2 days. Now I knew I was in trouble. go back into the present. So you can switch perspectives between the past and the present through putting in time, anchoring your material in time. When I was 5, now in my own living room, I saw, so just like relocating the narrator in place when you come back to the present. So is that getting at what you're asking, Eve? And if not, type in a clarification, and as I move forward with this material, I'll answer it for you if I can. So I just wanted to give a couple examples of voice in material. So the first one I'm going to read from Cheryl Strayed. These are a couple of older memoirs from Wild. And I chose one from Cheryl Strayed and then a really brief one from Elizabeth Gilbert. And they're both on the same topic. So I wanted to give you an example of how two authors handle the topic, and the topic is learning about the ups and downs in life. Okay? So this is Cheryl Strayed. She's standing on a mountain and looking out at the landscape, all right? This was a Mazama, I kept reminding myself. This was once a mountain that stood nearly 12,000 feet tall and then had its heart removed. This was once a wasteland of lava and pumice and ash. This was once an empty bowl that took hundreds of years to fill. But hard as I tried, I couldn't see them in my mind's eye. Not the mountain or the wasteland or the empty bowl. They simply were not there anymore. There was only the stillness and the silence of that water. What a mountain and wasteland and an empty bowl turned into after the healing process. Okay? So, I mean, as you know, if you read Wild, her hike is the healing process that she goes through after the loss of her mother. So here she's standing on the mountain, and all she's noticing is what's not there. Much like all of the things that she notices in her life are not there. So she uses the landscape to express a sense of loss. And if you've read the memoir, you know that loss is in every step that she takes on this trail, right? Her voice is full of loss and memory and reflection and hard trials. And here she sees a wasteland, but also you start to see the beginning of the energy of hope. What a mountain and a wasteland and an empty bowl turned into after the healing process. So, with what she notices in terms of detail, it's what's not there, right? And the reflection of the beauty of what's not there, and then with what is. So there's a contrast. And a lot of her voice is contrast through the whole material. If you think about reading Wild again, it's a really well-crafted memoir. It has a lot of the what and a lot of the so what, and it's infused not with something like sarcasm or flippancy, but absolutely with really deep, hard reflections. So the next one I want to read to you is from Eat, Pray, Love, and again, this is about learning about the ups and downs in life, and this is near the end of Elizabeth Gilbert's material where she's in Bali and she's with her sort of spiritual guide, whose name is Ketet. That's right. Okay, so she's in a conversation with him, and she says, "You've been to hell, Ketet?" He smiled. Of course he's been there. What's it like in hell? Same like in heaven, he said. He saw my confusion and tried to explain. Universe is a circle, Liz, he said. To up, to down, all same at end. I remembered an old Christian mystic notion, as above, so below. I asked, then how can you tell the difference between heaven and hell? Because of how you go. Heaven, you go up, through 7 happy places. Hell, you go down, through 7 sad places. This is why it better for you to go up, Liz. He laughed. Same, he said, same in end, so better to be happy in journey. I said, so heaven is love, then hell is... Love too, he said. Ketet laughed again. Always so difficult for young people to understand this. So what I love here is that, again, this is a quest memoir. I would qualify both Wild and Eat, Pray, Love as memoirs where the narrators are going on a quest to find something. In both cases, the quest is to find healing, but I think in Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love, near the end, she's at the point where she's ready to find love and really experience happiness. So in her arc, there's more of an optimism emerging here. And she could record any number of conversations that she had with Ketet, right? She was there for a long time in Bali having daily conversations with him. But she focuses on his optimism and what she learned about love from him. That whether you go up or you go down, love is at the bottom of it all, or at the end of it all, at the top of it all. So why not enjoy the journey? There's a much more positive energy, not so much about lack, but about gain. And it's all through the details that she's reporting. I think those are two good books to read side by side to look at the voice, the energy, the attitude, the tone in the material. Noticing how coming at a quest for the sake of healing for, two totally different journeys, but there's a really specific different kind of narrative arc and energy in the material. Okay, so here's two more, and these two are really distinct. The first one is, I just read Hillary Clinton's memoir, What Happened. And so this is on being flawed, on the topic of being flawed by Hillary Clinton. For a candidate, a leader, or anyone really, the question is not, are you flawed? It's, what do you do about your flaws? Do you learn from your mistakes so you can do and be better in the future? Or do you reject the hard work of self-improvement and instead tear others down so you can assert you're as bad or worse, so you can assert they're as bad or worse than you are? So here we have what you would call the voice of wisdom, okay? There's no scenic detail here. She has spent a lot of time describing what happened during the election, describing places that she went, describing people that she knew. So there's definitely, I would say this memoir is low on scenic depiction. It's mostly a reflection, but there is some there. This particular moment is the voice of wisdom, the voice of reflection. It's very straightforward. It's very non-emotional, which in her memoir she talks a lot about her non-emotionality and emotion in general and how hard it is for women to show emotion in politics without being reamed. And so there's, here she's just sort of like grappling with an issue, the issue of being flawed. So now I also recently read Lindy West's book Shrill, which I think would probably be qualified more as a series of essays than a memoir per se, although again there is a lot of scenic detail in her book. It's not as senses oriented as you would find in Wild or Eat, Pray, Love, but it's definitely got snippets of her life, of her partner, of her parents, of her home and her workplace. So Shrill, Notes from a Loud Woman, and again the topic is on being flawed. Every human being is a wet, gassy katamari of triumphs, traumas, scars, coping mechanisms, parental baggage, weird stuff you saw on the internet too young, pressure from your grandma to take over bodega when what you really want is to dance, and all the other fertilizer that makes a smear of DNA grow into a fully formed toxic avenger. I mean, to me, it's like laugh out loud, packed full of details and commentary and attitude. You know, there's a sarcasm that runs through this whole book where, you know, she really hits hard on certain issues like weight. She calls herself a fat woman, and she's angry at, there is an angry energy at the people who are critical and unkind, but there's also such a stand that she takes for humanity in general and being flawed. So you can hear like this totally, and her argument in this particular portion of the book is really, you know, what are we doing criticizing other people's flaws when each one of us is flawed? Same as Hillary Clinton's, but much livelier and packed full of, you know, parental baggage and weird stuff you saw on the internet too young. So I just love that. So just pausing here, questions, comments from you all, books that you've read that are chocked full of a really distinct voice that you think other people would enjoy. Don't hesitate to post, and let me see what you're thinking as we go along. I'm going to move here in a minute into tips on how you can get to the voice that your narrator needs in your memoir. So, okay, anytime, just jump in there. So, I like to talk with my writers in the Memory into Memoir program throughout the 9 months of developing characters through the use of Rudolf Laban's method of looking at 4 different energies that a character might bring onto a stage, for example. His ideas have been used a lot with dancers and musicians and athletes to get the physical energy of movement. And so I mean, you can do this while we're on the line here if you want to, or you can do it later. But the voice in Underground Railroad, Eve says, is a great voice. Yeah, thanks, Eve. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a memoir. I mean, one of the great voices of all literature is in Catcher in the Rye. Okay, so just want to get to tips and how you can get to the voice your narrator needs to tell the story that you want to tell. All right. So, so using Rudolf Laban's material, he talks about how there are 4 energies, 4 possibilities of energies. Okay, good. Hi guys, sorry about that. I'll splice all this together with my editing program, and then it'll be all one video for you in the end. Okay, so Rudolf Laban. Is your narrator direct or indirect? So a direct narrator is going to be giving really clear, straightforward details and straightforward insights. So that direct narrator will probably not pussyfoot around the issues, okay? However, your narrator could be indirect. Your narrator might be on a journey where it takes a long time to grow into an epiphany. So if your narrator is more indirect in nature, then you're going to take the long way to tell a story sometimes, perhaps. Or you're going to give a lot of details and maybe leave some more for the reader to suss out on her own. Okay? So direction, direct or indirect, is the first energy that Rudolf Laban asks you to think about when developing a character on the page, okay? Including your narrator, which is what we're talking about today, the voice of the narrator. The second energy to think about is speed. Is your narrator quick or sustained? Okay, so so is it like a sprint to tell a story, one little vignette at a time, or is it a sustained storytelling? Is it a sustained voice? You know, one that sort of lollygags through the material with a southern drawl? Or is it a quick New York, kind of energy that you're bringing to the storytelling. And I'm going to give you an exercise here, don't fear, at the end of going over these 4 possible dualities of energies. Weight is the third one. So the first is direction. Is your narrator direct or indirect? The second is speed. Is your narrator quick or sustained in their language, in their storytelling process, in the way they linger over details, quick or sustained? The third is weight. Is your narrator heavy or light? Okay, so if your narrator is light, there might be an optimism, a sweetness, a hopefulness, which might be the same as optimism. Could be even sarcasm. Sarcasm can be light or heavy, right? So a light touch on the material. I think about the Mitford series. If any of you ever read that, it's fiction, but all of the material is covered with a very light touch, kindness and joy and perspective and grace coming to the page. Whereas if your narrator is heavy in energy, you're bringing the sadness, you're bringing the struggle. I see you, Anne, on there. Your narrator might be heavier at times as she's grappling with her story and moving through her exhaustion, right? Depends on what the material is, but also, because you could write that story from a lighthearted perspective too, making everything really absurd and darkly funny, which would still be sort of heavy in a way, but there'd be a light touch to it, So heaviness or lightness, that's the third one. And the last is flow. Is your narrator bound up, in a stuck place, or free-flowing? I would say with Wild, for example, that Cheryl Strayed's character is bound. She's bound by this massive pack that she wears. She's bound by the burden of grief. She's bound by how hard every step is to take. Whereas I would probably characterize Liz Gilbert's narrator in Eat, Pray, Love a little freer. The word freedom appears multiple times. Freedom is what she's in search of. And it's sort of out there like a carrot through the whole material. So there's a willingness to laugh through a lot of that book, even though there are some harder, heavier times. And she brings that out through as she eats and eats and eats and develops this muffin top, and it's like, oh well, I'm eating. That's what I'm doing in Italy. There's a real freedom in that. So again, the 4 energies: direction, direct or indirect; speed, quick or sustained; weight, heavy or light; and flow, bound or free. Okay, so as you're thinking about who your narrator is, and what kind of energies she brings to the page, I'm going to give you a little challenge. I'm going to ask you to go out for a walk, okay? And just like out on a trail or in your neighborhood or whatever. And I want you to, before you start your walk, to close your eyes and to feel into the energy of the storyteller you're putting on the page. And feel into these 4 energies: direction, speed, weight, and flow. And walk about the neighborhood as if you're in that energy, all right? Because in your daily life, you move through all these energies, right? I mean, we're all really complex creatures. But when you're creating a voice on the page, that voice is probably not going to show all the sides of you. It's a particular storytelling voice that you're assuming. And you want it to be authentic and real and like you, but it won't be like all of you. It'll be like an aspect of you. So move around in the neighborhood. Go order coffee somewhere in that tone of voice that you're trying to strike on the page. Come back home, having walked the neighborhood and ordered coffee in this particular energy, maybe a direct, sustained, heavy, bound energy, and then sit down at the page and start writing. And let's see what kind of words, word choices, and again, let's just go back quickly over that before we end here. How the writer produces the voice that she's shooting for with word choice, sentence structure, pacing, choice of details or decision about what she sees, and dialogue. And then remembering that we've got the voice of innocence coming in to show exactly what's happening, and then pulling back to the voice of wisdom, making meaning of what's happening. So I hope that's helpful. It's just the beginning of a conversation. And again, as I always say with my students in the 9-month Memory into Memoir program, this doesn't happen in the first draft, and it doesn't happen in the second draft. This is something that you feel into in the same way that in adolescence you try on different clothes until you get to a sense of like, oh, this is who I am. I'm goth, or whatever. So just, be gentle with yourself as you do this on the page, and keep sculpting the voice that you're going to be using through the whole narrative. Sorry about the break in the audio, and I will splice this together and put it up on my YouTube channel. I just want to invite any of you who are watching, if you're working on a memoir and we're not working together, I would love to give you a free breakthrough coaching session to help you get started on or push through a stuck place in your narrative. No obligation, just a chance to break through that stuck spot that you're in, and we can explore whether or not it's a good fit for us to work together further. But in any case, I am in support of you finding your voice and singing it loud and proud and being real on the page. And lots of love. Have a great day. Thanks for joining me. Cheers and happy holidays.